no regrets, no confusion. There'll be no pollution. I'm so thankful I've decided to change my ways.
Welcome back to the Leaving Eden podcast. We are your hosts. My name's Gabriel Hacohen.
And I'm cult survivor, cult expert, Sadie Carpenter.
Today, we're really excited about this episode. This is one that we've been looking forward to for a couple of months now. We have Tia Levings coming on. She has a new book that is coming out. If you're listening to this on release day, it comes out tomorrow. If you're listening to it any day that isn't the release day of this episode, which I believe is August 5th, then that book is out right now, and you should go to the bookstores right now and get it.
Yeah. And if you are listening to this on release day, if you pre-order the book, you will be able to get lifetime free access to Tia's Substack as well.
We both read this book. We thought it was fantastic. Spoiler. The book is called A Well-Trained Wife, and it documents, it's a memoir from Tia about her life getting into IBLP patriarchy and then getting out of IBLP patriarchy, and her marriage, her abusive marriage that she was in, and how she escaped from that by the skin of her teeth, really.
Yeah. Yeah. So Tia talks about her upbringing, which was more typical of a Southern Baptist megachurch kind of upbringing. And she goes into incredible specifics about how she was exposed to the ideas of Christian patriarchy and how those ideas of purity culture, misogyny, and patriarchy weaved their way even into what she thought was a more mainstream church that she was raised in. How those ideas influenced her as a young person, how they led her to marry somebody who was abusive, and where her life took her from there.
So I think how this episode is going to go, we've already recorded the interview that we did with Tia. We recorded it the day before we're recording this opening section here. So what we're going to do is I think we're going to do a little segment for the patrons where we talk about like just a couple of things that are going on in Fundy world, like the Fundy reactions to the Olympics. And then after that, we're going to go into our sort of review of the book. We're going to give a little bit of context for the sections of the book that we specifically talk about, so that if you haven't read the book yet at the time that you're listening to this episode, you're going to be able to sort of know what the context is that it is that we're talking about when we bring up a couple events in the book with Tia. And that's sort of how this is going to go.
Yep.
But before we get into that, the Leaving Eden podcast is the podcast about my BFF and co-host, cult expert, cult survivor, Sadie Carpenter, her life in and escape from the independent fundamental Baptist cult, the cult in which she was raised. We talk about this cult. We talk about other cults. We talk about religion. We talk about fundamentalism. We talk about the real and present threat that cults and cult ideologies pose to society as a whole. And it is our goal to promote freedom of mind, freedom of thought, and freedom of religion. So if you like our show, if you are a fan of our show, then there are some things that you can do to support us. You can join our Patreon at patreon.com/Leaving Eden podcast, where you will get access to extended, uncensored, ad-free versions of most of our episodes, including last week. What did we talk about during our Patreon? We talked about I can't remember. We went on a big extended Patreon sidebar, and now I've completely memory holed it, so it can't have been that good, but you should listen to it anyway. But today we're going to talk about the Olympics. Do you remember what it was?
I do not. I knew what it was before you said that, and now I don't anymore.
Yeah, that kind of happens when you make a podcast, is that you talk about so much stuff and then you memory hole it as soon as it's done. And then it comes back to you at random times, and you remember very specifically when and where and in what context it was that you said a very specific thing. Don't ask me to explain it, but that's just how it works. But today we're going to be talking about funny reactions to like the Olympic opening ceremony and stuff like that, and that should be good. So if you want to subscribe to the Patreon, we'll talk about that for a little bit there. You can join our Facebook group and our subreddit. Both of those are called Eden Exodus. Both are I think good places to talk about fundamentalism, the podcast, things related to that, Christian nationalism, all that. We try to have a substantive and positive discussion, but people share trauma in there, people share memes, people share just personal experiences, and so that's a good place. But the Facebook group is our main forum. You can also share our show with your friends, your family, your coworkers, anyone you like who you think might get some enjoyment out of this podcast. Is there anything else before we thank the patrons?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, I'm going to just give a big shout out and a big thank you to our I Gave It All to Your patrons. Your names are Kathleen Moncrief, maybe I'm 1010, but we're not certain that you're 1010, Melissa Manown, Melora King, and Todd Dale on behalf of his wonderful spouse, Madeline Antrim.
Thank you so much to the I Gave It All to Your patrons.
And thank you to our Faith Promise Missions tier patrons. Your names are Alex P., Alicia Guild, Allie Allen, Chrissa, Dora J., Eleanor Donahue, Hannah Ross, Hannah Montana, Hope Norum, Horton Here's a Shane, Janine Collin, Jana Connor, Jen Kaharski, Jessica Tambo, Jonna, Junie B. Jones, and the B stands for Back Streets Back. All right. Yeah. Kat Henwood, Kay Tur-Wee, Kristen Marie, Learned Vixen, Linda Morgan, Madeline Antrim, Madeline Cusick, Maddie the Seventh Day Badventist, Mary Martin, Megan Arndt, Rob the Methodist, Stephanie Johnson, Steve and Amy, Susie, Tara McNamara, Wes the Cowboy, and Zoe Shuck. Thank you guys so much for subscribing at our Faith Promise Missions tier.
Yes, and thank you to everybody who supports us over on Patreon, no matter what amount. And thank you to everybody who supports us in non-financial ways, like sharing our podcast on social media, leaving us a positive review wherever you listen to podcasts, recommending us to friends and family. All of those things are a very real and tangible contribution to what we're doing here. In general, we talk about a lot of potentially triggering topics on this show, including but not limited to suicide and mental health, racism, misogyny, PTSD symptoms, child abuse, mental, physical, and sexual abuse, and spiritual abuse, including guilt, shame, and fear. In most episodes, we will mention at least a few of these topics, but we try very hard to avoid graphic detail unless it's relevant and necessary to the story that we're telling. We also do our best to give the audience a heads up before we include that kind of detail. This episode, as Gavi was saying, contains some discussion of sexual violence, domestic violence. There is also brief discussion of the death of a very young infant. This one has most of the trigger warnings that you can possibly imagine for both this episode and the book. I think the book is 1,000% worth it.
I think that in the interview, I described it to Tia as all gas, no brakes trauma.
Yes.
So keep that in mind. So we're here today. The meat of our episode today is we're talking about the book A Well-Trained Wife by Tia Levings. Sadie and I both read this book.
Yes.
Initial thoughts.
Oh my goodness. This is a book that I hope everybody in the world reads, especially everybody in the United States reads before the election. This is the crucial required reading. It is also so incredibly written. I loved this book. Reads like a novel. It uses figurative language and is creative in the right places with punctuation and alliteration and all of those little writing tools in a way that feels super natural and organic and not try hard. The writing style really impressed me because the writing style is such a great vehicle for the content of the book. The content of the book is the most difficult thing I've ever had to read as far as books go. It is as hard to read as the Jack Scott sentencing memorandum or the Josh Duggar trial coverage. It is that gripping and raw and difficult to read. but her style is so beautiful that her style just kind of pulls you along through that. And I think the pairing of the deep trauma, but her lovely writing style was something really special. And I'm really thankful I got to experience it.
There's a bit of humor in the book as well.
Yes. Of course, because we've all read, we've read Heather's book and we've seen Tia on TikTok, and we know that nobody makes dark jokes like cult survivors.
Yeah, and this is a very traumatic thing that happened, and then there'll be like a little like point of humor to make it, not too punishing. That being said, this book was deeply harrowing. There are a few moments in the story of the book is that Tia grows up in a evangelical, like a Southern Baptist family in Florida. And as she gets older, as she becomes a later teenager, she gets pulled more and more. And, as she gets married, she gets pulled more and more and more into more fundamentalist versions of Christianity and more fundamentalist circles within Christianity. And her husband, who turns out to be abusive and quite violent and quite awful, he systematically keeps her isolated, systematically keeps moving her and the family around the country, and from Florida to like Tennessee, in order to keep them isolated. And as he becomes more and more and more paranoid and more like, I mean, how would you describe it?
I would describe it as a growing mental illness, an untreated mental illness.
Continued break from reality, we've all talked about and heard about this idea that within fundamentalist circles, that as the world becomes more worldly and as the world becomes more liberal, it's on you to try to fight back against it by going more to the old paths and more to and becoming more reactionary in response to that happening. And her husband definitely took that to heart.
Yes. We want you to read the book, so we don't want to give too many spoilers, but he was a person who was really struggling, I think, with himself and his own concepts of faith and purity and all of those things. And because of the fundamentalist subculture, he was even less likely than many men out in the real world to seek help for what was going wrong for him. And this led to a really disastrous home situation.
Yeah, and the home situation, it started out violent. But it became, it went from being violent to being life-threatening. It stayed life-threatening for a decent portion of time.
So this is a story of how fundamentalism groomed and prepared Tia for that abusive relationship. And it is the story of how she, all on her own, clawed her way out of that grooming and control and abuse. It is incredibly vivid in describing how she woke up to the reality of her situation and how specifically a person might recognize their own humanity and decide to be a real person and find themselves and the struggles that a person goes through when they are experiencing that.
And she figured this out basically in the nick of time, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, it is suspenseful. It is beautiful. I cannot wait for the discussion in our Facebook group when people get to read this whole book. I'm so excited.
There's a couple of moments that we discuss in the interview, and I want to give a TW before we talk about these for the loss of a child.
Yeah.
There's one moment which I discussed with Tia in the interview that you can hear her talk about. There is a moment when she and her husband, they have their baby daughter Clara is born with a heart abnormality. and they have to fly to Atlanta to put her daughter through a surgery that will hopefully repair the heart abnormality and save her life. This surgery happens, and the daughter survives for a short period of time, and eventually then succumbs to, I believe it was an infection that ended up taking her life. And it was just the most heartbreaking chapter that I've read. And then on top of that, while this is all going on, and they're in Atlanta, her husband is driving with her in a car through Atlanta traffic, and he starts berating her and calling her all sorts of, names and threatening her and saying that she's not a good enough wife, and that's why their child is, on death's door. They're driving through traffic in Atlanta, and her husband essentially pushes her out of their car while they're stuck in traffic on an overpass, and, says, get out of the car, and makes her walk to a parking lot barefoot where he has the car pulled over so she can get back in. And this, for me, was one of the moments that really, I've read many accounts of people being abusive beforehand. And this was a moment that really, to me, it was quite shocking in just the lack of compassion and the lack of any semblance of this person that I'm in a car with is also a human being who has feelings, who is going through the same thing that I am, possibly even worse than I'm going through this thing.
Right. That is, and this is just my opinion, but in my opinion, that is the end result of the Eve brought sin into the world, women are the weaker vessel narrative. This opinion is not confirmed or denied by Tia Levings or any associates of Tia Levings, but my opinion is that this is one very extreme example of what we always see in patriarchy, what we always see in purity culture, which, when you strip away all the other layers, it comes down to the idea that women are less of people, less human.
And when you have a teaching that, well, God's going to remove his hand of protection from you if you disobey, if something totally just awful happens, then the place that your brain is going to go is you're going to figure out, oh, how do I blame myself for this? Because blaming yourself and looking for a reason is a coping mechanism that normal people go through.
Yeah.
And for him to say, no, it's your fault, the reason why this is going wrong is because of you, is just the most heartless thing that I can think of. And it just feels so beyond reason.
Yeah, and it doesn't feel, unfortunately, beyond reason to me. It feels like a very natural end result of the theology.
Yeah, and I have to remind myself that the fact that this stuff still seems shocking to me is proof that I'm not completely cynical about human nature at this point. But
yeah,
it's that passage was rough for me to read.
Was there another one that we needed to give context for before we get into the interview?
I think there's one more. I think you talk about needing about the moment when she decides that she has to leave. We're not trying to do too many spoilers, but if you just want to give a general overview of what happens then.
Yeah, so Tia had decided that she needed to plan to leave with her children for her and her children's safety. And the day before she was planning on leaving, her husband at the time went into a rage, was saying some things that were very concerning, and left the house. And she relied on her intuition. Her intuition said, you need to leave now. And she listened to her intuition, which is a theme that comes up throughout the book, of how we, especially as AFAB people, but anybody who was raised in Christian fundamentalism, were discouraged from listening to our intuition. We were discouraged, out of the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Whatever, lean not on your own understanding. Whatever your heart says is probably incorrect. And you need a scriptural reason. You need guidance from your husband or your pastor or your authority, because your heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. She ignored that teaching at the exact right moment and quickly left the house with her children. On the way, as she is leaving the house on the highway, she passes the husband's car going the other way on the highway back to the house. And she realizes that he went to his work, and she realizes that he kept the gun at his work. So it became immediately clear to her that this was a life and death situation, and that listening to her intuition most likely saved her life and her children's lives.
Yeah, and there was like a 5-minute difference either way.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
And I 100% suggest go read it in Tia's voice. It is so much more dramatic. It's an incredible story.
If you're somebody like me who prefers audiobooks to print books, then I believe that Tia also recorded the audiobook herself, so you can hear her narrate it. I'd recommend that as well. I'm more of an audiobook guy, but the pre-copies that we got were paper, so I read it in print, but that's also available as well wherever you get audiobooks. And this book is going to be available, I guess, in bookstores, anywhere that you want to get it tomorrow. And without further ado, why don't we get to our interview with Tia?
Right after this offering break.
Ashley, I've been given the gift of prophecy, and God has given me a message for you.
My name is Maddie Lassiter.
And my name is Ashley Teeter, and I'm Maddie's older sister, and we're the hosts of the Cult Next Door podcast.
This isn't just another cult story. This is a story that spans over decades, involving 2 different apocalyptic cults and a father whose control and manipulation tore our family apart.
First-hand accounts of decades of estrangement and shunning, disturbing revelations and visions from God, and spiritual, mental, and physical abuse only scratch the surface of this story. Find The Cult Next Door on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hey, Sadie here. If this is your first time listening to the Leaving Eden podcast, make sure you go back and check out episode 57. It's a primer episode for new listeners. That episode tells my personal story and gives you all the terms and information that you'll need to know going forward. Also, check out our cult true crime series, The First Family of Fundamentalism, so that you can get the whole cult story. If you like our show, you can support us by joining our Patreon, where we have extended and uncensored episodes as well as other bonus content available. You can also join in the discussion in our Facebook group. That group is called Eden Exodus. Tell a friend, tell a family member, tell your worst enemy. The Leaving Eden podcast is a fully independent podcast, and we really appreciate your support. Now, back to the show.
We are here today with Tia Levings, the author of A Well-Trained Wife, which is out on sale tomorrow, if you're listening to this episode on release day on Monday the 5th. We are so excited to be here with Tia and introduce her to our listeners, for those of you who don't already know her. This is one of my dream interviews. So thank you, Tia, for being here.
You're so welcome.
Would you give the short version of your story, kind of the cliff notes for our listeners, for those who don't know you from Shiny Happy People or TikTok?
Yes, thank you. So A Well-Trained Wife is my memoir it's my story of getting into and out of Christian patriarchy. I also call that evangelical patriarchy or high control religion. If you've seen Shiny Happy People and you're familiar with the Institute of Basic Life Principles and Bill Gothard, then that is one part of my story. But not everyone is familiar with that. So I think it's really important that I start out with the beginning part of my story, that I grew up in a mainstream evangelical Christian church, the very normal, ordinary upbringing. And it took me all the way through into a highly reformed cult. And I was excommunicated and escaped from that in 2007. So that's kind of the breadth of the story. Today, I educate on the abuses in Christian fundamentalism, and I try to tell others what it's really like to live behind closed doors in Christian patriarchy, so that if they're more familiar with like the glossy images that we see in the trad wife movement or the Duggars TV show, that is not what it's really like. And And I'm somebody who's been through it and came out of it, and I can speak to it in a way that doesn't re-traumatize myself. So I've taken up that work.
Well, I'm so glad that you have. My story differs from yours because I was born into the IFB and never went as far as the IBLP. So I was only in the one group. One of the first things that really caught my attention about your book was the progression from standard mainstream evangelicalism to Reformed patriarchy, and how easy it seemed to fall into that patriarchal way of life.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I hoped to achieve with my book, because it is what it was like to live with it. It felt very natural and organic and reasonable. We were constantly looking for guidance and older, wiser teaching, as we confronted obstacles in our life. And we were told that's what we should do, is always turn to mentors and guidance. And so we always had the new book or the new pastor or the new theological trend to follow. And many readers have reflected back like, wow, I was on that same path. And if it was just not for one little change, I could have been in the same circumstances. And that's one of the things I hope to accomplish with telling the story.
One of those books that you turned to along that road was Fascinating Womanhood. And
yes,
that caught my attention because that was on all the bookshelves around me when I was growing up in the independent fundamental Baptist movement. That had popularity outside of strict fundamentalism.
Yeah, that book is actually a Mormon book, and it doesn't lead with that. So a lot of fundamentalists do not realize they have Mormon literature on their shelves. If they did know that, they wouldn't. I call it the grandma's little book. Like, everybody who grows up in that kind of like religious household, their granny has like a little shelf of books that are her, from her time. And so a lot of people like, oh, I recognize that book. My grandma had that book. My mom had that book. That was in our house. It was published in 1963, and it's still in print, and they still have Facebook groups. It's very long lasting, instructional on how to be hyper feminine and childlike. So it's been very influential in our culture in a way that a lot of people haven't heard the title, and they don't realize that that's where it stemmed from. They just thought it was part of culture. They don't know that it was by design.
And that book influences so many other Christian marriage books that I've read, both in my upbringing and then specifically for this podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
One thing that jumped out to me was in the beginning, when you were just in your church as a teenager, there were people who were the Gothardites, who were in the IBLP, and the impression was kind of, oh, that's kind of extra.
Right.
But then you don't really get into the Bill Gothard stuff until you have children of your own and you're like, what do I do? How do I do this?
Yeah. I mean, I think, so I grew up in a mega church where my pastor was the president of the Southern Baptist Convention. We were very aware there were other ways to be Christian, and there are levels of devotion in any congregation. So I called them the special Christians because I knew they were like extra set apart. In another tradition, they might be called monastic or just really conservative. No one really knew what was going on and what their influences were. So we just knew them by their outside example and their lifestyle example. And so, really conservative clothes, prairie-looking wives, big families. That wasn't really the norm for a big, giant 20,000-member congregation, but we definitely had this rank that was rising. And they were respected because they were willing to live the Christian life a little more devoted than we were. We still liked to go out to dinner on Sunday, and maybe we could only manage 2 kids. And so like the joke was, I can only manage my 2 kids. I can't imagine having 8, and we just like respected them, but did not want that necessarily for ourselves. So until I was married and had a baby and had an impetus to ask them for advice, I might not have ever stepped into their world. I might have gone elsewhere.
The IBLP in particular tends to provide concrete solutions for people's problems.
Right.
And I think every cult that I've looked at does that. I know the IFB does that. The IFB and IBLP both very specifically target parents.
Yeah,
because
they're
say,
vulnerable.
Yeah. One way, I have a 3-year-old myself, and I understand it on a new level since I've had my own child. They present a problem. You want something better for your children than what you had. You want them to have a better education or a more stable home life or a life that's blessed by God or a different religious education. Whatever it is that you wish for your children, things that are normal and good for parents to wish for their children. They offer it to you. You can have this if you follow all of the rules. And that's a theme that comes up over and over in your book.
Yeah, it's really fundamentalism in a nutshell. I look at a fundamentalism now, which can be in anything. It doesn't have to only be religious. But that is the tell, that if they're selling a promise and they're saying, here's the steps to get to it, and there's a formula and there's a code of conduct and behavior, and if you follow these steps, you'll get this result. That is a fundamentalist approach to happiness. And they sell it to people who want happy families and obedient children and good opportunities and eternity. The stakes are really high because you're going to keep your child from hell. Who wouldn't want that?
Those are normal things for a parent to want. And a parent who believes in religion obviously wants their child not to go to hell.
Right.
And all good parents want their children to have good opportunities in life and a supportive community around them. So it preys on normal things that people want. I often say it feels like the people who tried the hardest and did the most in fundamentalism are the ones who end up leaving. And that seems to play out over and over and over again. It's those of us who tried the hardest to keep every rule are so often the ones that deconstruct hard and write books or start podcasts.
That's important that you point that out. I think it's because the fruit doesn't match the promise. And these are people who've burned themselves out trying so hard to do everything to the letter of the law. And they're gobsmacked that this isn't turning out the way that it was promised. And the pain becomes too much to hold. So it breaks at some point.
Tia, I was familiar with your story from watching the Shiny Happy People Duggar Family Secrets documentary on Amazon. And so Sadie got a copy of your book before I did, and she read it before I did. And her response to it was, I think Tia is probably the person who's worked the hardest that I've, ever met to try to fit in with what the Christian patriarchy wanted. And after she told me that, I was like, oh God, what's in here?
Yeah, those of us who try the hardest deconstruct the hardest.
Yes.
And I think you may have tried more than anyone I've ever known. You're way up there.
A lot of things went into that. I'm a driven person. I believed with my whole heart and soul that this would work for me. I internalized so heavily that if it wasn't working, it was my fault. So I must keep working on myself. I have a strong work ethic, and I also have traits of perfectionism and people pleasing and drive to be accepted and loved. And so all of that funneled into, yes, I really gave this my every effort. And when I escaped and I realized that I was in jeopardy of those years becoming the legacy of my entire life, I did the same thing to my healing. And I went whole hog with my whole heart and soul on reclamation. So what that has resulted in is brighter, bigger healing than people might have thought was possible, because I wouldn't accept the alternative.
That is incredibly inspiring. I think what really started to show me that how seriously you took it all. The book talks about increasing financial struggles, and you needed to have more money for your family. So you started using reusable toilet paper and hanging your clothes on a line to not use electricity. And the creativity and the extent to which you would go to. Now, I'm a couponer. I'm one of those people.
Oh, you're so good. I can't do those. They're math. I can't do coupons.
No, she's an artist.
I'm one of those people. I go in the store with Gavi has gone to the grocery store with me. I go to the store with a map of the aisles. So I only go down the aisles in a particular order with what I need. And I have coupons for everything. And but the ways that you save money are beyond me. And that's really saying something, because I'm about the most couponing person I know.
I always wished I could try to be good at coupons, but usually the coupons were for things I couldn't afford to buy.
Yeah.
So, I was making myself like a coupon for ketchup is a normal thing, but I was making my own ketchup because I couldn't afford the initial bottle of ketchup. It's
Right.
cheaper to buy tomatoes. And so or grow them.
Yeah.
So that's what I did.
And you did all of that with your small children at home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did you sleep?
Yeah. I did actually. I'm a good sleeper.
Wow.
The thing that really disturbed my sleep the most was that I couldn't go to sleep until my husband was asleep because I trust that I was safe. So, and he was not a good sleeper. So usually, even more than having a newborn, because I was pretty regimented because of fundamentalism, regimented with my newborn care, and softened that with each baby. But I was, a good newborn mom, and I had that like handled. Would sleep fine with babies, and then the thing that would really get me was just being safe for him. So one of the things that I'm grateful for from those years is because I had to be home all the time, I did it with my kids. It wasn't like I was doing it apart from my children. They gardened with me. They gathered things with me. We went berry picking together. They were all doing their own laundry at 10. I did it with them.
There are little parts of that I try to carry on into having my own kid now. Very small parts of it, but there are little bits of that homeschooling ethic or that DIY ethic that I try to pass on to her. I just try to be very careful about choosing those parts.
I think there's so much wisdom in knowing how to do things, and that's true no matter what you're like. Separate all this ideology apart from it. As human beings surviving on the planet, we should know how to do things, and because the economy vacillates, we should be able to be resilient through it. So that is something I carried through beyond fundamentalism. Was I told my kids, more than a degree with letters after your name, I want you to know how to do things. So figure out like how to learn, how to look things up, how to, get the things that you need to get in order to do the thing that you want to do. And that is a life skill that they'll take with them that, it thrived in that environment, but it probably would have been present for me anyway, because of before times.
Well, it's also how you got out of that environment because you had your trapdoor because you
Good point.
instinctively, you looked for a way. And that was something that resonated with me really deeply. My trapdoor was the Stuff Fundies Like website way back in the day.
Oh, yeah.
I was on there. I was logging into Stuff Fundies Like from Hyles-Anderson College Wi-Fi.
Good for you.
And somehow didn't get caught doing that. But that was my way out. Like I don't know, I guess close to 10 years later.
Yeah.
And I had that same experience of I have to find I have to find an outlet. There's got to be a way out. Can you talk more about how you found Trapdoor and what that community meant for you?
I will never crap on the internet, that's for sure. I think it was a life-saving portal for me. Women talking, communication, like people talking, sharing stories, commiserating, all of that is a portal. And I understand now why, government wants to shut down social media platforms and restrict us, because that is in keeping with everything they do in their real congregations. And so I wasn't allowed to get together with the women, and I was, very, very isolated, either socially or practically, from other resources. We were forbidden to use the library. Book banning was a very common thing. And I was looking for ways to breathe and be, and especially like in the scope of my Christianity, I thought I spent a long time thinking I could get rid of the bad parts and keep the good parts. And so I looked for ways to maximize and be like the best Christian wife and mother I could be and the happiest. And so that is the spirit that I sat down that day to a homeschooling forum. And it started out with the Sunlight Forum, which was already a little rebellious because even though it was a Christian curriculum, it used real books, actual literature to homeschool kids. And I wanted real stories and happiness and life for my kids. And so that's why I had chosen that. And that led to women who wanted to talk about what they were learning, which was like water to me. I like we're allowed. We don't have to just talk about stain removal and how to like use our crock pot. Like we're allowed to talk about what we're reading. So that's how it began. We started a forum just to talk about the books we were reading, the ideas we were having, museums we wanted to see, And we were all different kinds of Christians, but doing the same thing. We were all Christian homeschoolers and in a more secular, well, it's in a more mainstream environment. They had no idea how conservative my home was. But in one of the ironies, the majority of us from this group are divorced today because we were the same kind of woman married to the same kind of man, and those marriages broke the same way in varying degrees of violence. It's interesting to see the personality types and how they manifest in this environment. But yeah, Trapdoor was a real trapdoor. And in the end, it became a network, like an underground railroad for me to hide.
Internet friends are real friends.
Yeah.
And I will stand by that.
Yes.
One of the most upsetting stories that I think I read in the book was the Mother's Day story.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. You're the first interviewer who's mentioned that one.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean,
I can't wait to hear what you thought.
I don't know. I was texting Sadie earlier and I said, this book is just all gas, no brakes trauma.
Well, I have a question for you, but I will say part of that is because the way that memoir is crafted is that I'm telling you a story for a reason, and I chose scenes that support that reason. I am not telling you my entire life story for 20 years, and it's not a parade of the bad things that happened to me. It's the experiences I had that formed decision making that got chosen to be included in the book. And so the fact that the Mother's Day scene is in there and the time where it happened in the timeline was a critical reality check for me. How did it land for you, and why was it such a standout scene?
I mean, the thing that stood out to me the most was just the almost like the unbelievable lack of compassion.
Mm-hmm.
This is the most difficult thing that any person would ever have to go through. The process of like losing a child, losing a baby, is the most, and then just, treating somebody just so horribly.
Yeah.
During that time, and that to me, that just like I don't know, I try to not have, I try to be optimistic about how I view other people, and I read something like this, I'm like, people can't be this bad. People can't be this mean to each other and, still go to sleep at night. But
well, that's an important scene because it exemplifies the lack of empathy. That lack of empathy that you picked up on is part of the psychological component that's there. Sociopathic personalities, borderline personality disorder, all of that, they struggle to show any empathy and compassion. And so that was an example of where that kind of profile, which we later had a diagnosis for, showed up in our lives. No compassion, no weakness, no humanity allowed. And he could not allow that in me because he can't allow that in him. Like, I think that's really what it came down to, is that he had to be as hard on me as he was on himself, because there could be no allowance for weakness.
And that is, to me, so symptomatic of fundamentalism in almost several different ways. We know that fundamentalism supports toxic masculinity and expects men to be and perform and behave a certain way. Fundamentalism expects everybody to perform gender roles very strictly. Fundamentalism expected him to be hard on himself. You talked about him praying for hours in the morning and the passion with which he prayed. That is fundamentalism. That is him trying to perform fundamentalism.
Right.
So there is that side of it, the toxic masculinity and the performance of gender roles and the performance of life in general. But there's also the side of fundamentalists truly do not see women as fully human.
Right.
Some of them get close. Some of them don't get anywhere close.
Right. I think that's accurate. That's definitely accurate. I was that's interesting to put that interpretation on that scene, because I was not allowed to show up as a human person, a mother grieving or stressed or exhausted in that scene. I had to be utilitarian, and the fact that I couldn't contain my utilitarianness anymore and perform the way I was expected to was used against me, as a way to harm me and bring me back, like punish me for that humanity.
the scene in that moment when he throws you out of a moving car. He essentially just not out of, but he says, "Get out of this car," and you're on the on like an overpass.
I'm in Atlanta traffic on an overpass, barefoot. Yeah.
And a man in the car behind you is he pulls over and he stops. He's like, "Did I just see what I thought I saw?"
Yeah. Yes. Bless his heart.
And he doesn't know the whole backstory of everything that's going on with you, why you're in Atlanta.
Yeah.
The reason why you guys are in that city, that,
that stranger showed me more compassion than the man who is the father of my child next to me in the car. And also, if he had been a female, I might have been able to go with him. But the fact that he was a man, I couldn't escape with a man. There was no way to get away in that environment.
Right. So the environment came to harm you in so many different and separate ways in that one scene, in that one moment. Fundamentalism was almost attacking you from all sides with so many different arrows. I have experienced that, a feeling of having people out in the outside world show compassion like that, although not in quite as extreme circumstances. I hope that some of the many people who helped you and tried to help you will be able to see themselves in this book.
Yeah.
I hope that everybody in the world reads it.
Thank you.
And if that man is still out there in the world somewhere, that maybe he'll remember. Lady in a Sunday dress, barefoot on the side of the highway.
I know it's not the kind of thing you forget. So I hope there's a few characters like that I hope that see it and understand what was really going on.
I don't know if you followed Detra's story.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I did.
From Humans of New York.
Mm-hmm.
She found the lady and her daughter that picked her up on the side of the road.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. So that made me think of this person and made me wonder. And I hope that you get the opportunity for those people to see how far you've come.
That would be really special. There are friends from that time that are still friends today that, they're just like apologetic. Tia, we didn't know. And I know they didn't know. Like, I worked really hard to make sure they didn't know.
You tried just about the hardest of anybody I've ever met. And you got the outcome that so many of us get.
Yeah. Freedom has been good. Complicity, admitting to my complicity, unpacking it, deconstructing, being able to deconstruct as the movement was providing that language. It didn't really exist in 2007, but to see where we are today and have so many resources, it's been amazing. I can't imagine trying to do it earlier when there was so much less, available.
Mm-hmm.
I think all of this is coming to a head for a reason. And when I look at the headlines and the way we are as a country right now, and that so much of the world that I try to escape is coming for our country, I understand there's a reason behind all of this, and that there's a usefulness for it.
People like you are heroes who are
thank you
warning the people, because there are people out there who are never going to listen to a story that isn't shocking.
Right.
They're never going to listen to a story that isn't incredibly well written. They're not going to listen to a story that doesn't grab them the way that your book grabs them. And I'm so glad that you're out there doing it.
Thank you.
Because I'm hoping it will reach even more people. I've already, I have so many people that I have made pre-order.
Thank you.
You have to buy this you have to read this. You'll understand my life so much better.
Pre-orders really matter. And if this airs on the 5th, you can still get my Substack for a lifetime free if you send your proof of purchase in. So that's at contact@tialevings.com and through the 5th. So this will be
Perfect.
Just on time.
Yeah, this will come out on Patreon a couple days early, and it'll come out on streaming on the 5th.
Okay, cool.
I would really love to hear more about the intentional ways that you healed. Because, yes, this book is shocking and raw and difficult to read, and your pain is so evident. But the parts about your healing are also so beautiful and absolutely inspiring. So I would love to hear about the choice to start healing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How did it feel making that choice that I'm going to start healing now?
Well, at first I didn't. At first, I think I was in shock for a really long time. And I didn't know that you could be in shock until probably 10 years later. I didn't know that shock, the condition of it, could last as long as it does in the nervous system. And nervous system regulation wasn't language I had until about 2 years ago. So I, just I've had to learn. So what I did, though, was I approached healing the same way I approached any other obstacle in my life. I have this obstacle. Here's what I have to work with. Here's what my goal is. How can I get there? And so that part of my personality and my approach has worked for me really well, no matter what the obstacle is. In any, like my day-to-day life today, I still do that. Like, okay, what am I working with? How do I have to get there? That kind of approach. But for a long time, I didn't heal, and I didn't really think I could. I thought I was kind of broken for good forever. I would just be damaged forever. It wasn't until I got physically sick through the body keeps the score type toll that trauma takes on our systems. And anybody who's struggled with autoimmune disease or trauma related symptoms, yes, I see your rash there. Yeah, I mean the whole thing. The idea that it can be what we went through and a traumatic experience causing this physical symptom is kind of mind blowing, but true. And today, what I do when I'm feeling a physical symptom is I take a trauma approach to it first across the board, because I have so much in this. And when I do talk about it, like it can be stirred up in my subconscious and impacting me in ways that don't have top of mind. So that started in around 2012, 2013 when I got really, really sick, and they thought I had MS. They told me I would be blind for the rest of my life. I was white blind at this point, and everything was pink. Couldn't see the color white at all. And lots of debilitating pain and headaches and all this stuff. And I just had this rebellion like rise in me. Like the fact that there wasn't a point for point test that said, like there's no test for MS. It's in a summary that they make based on your symptoms and patterns and repetition. And I was like, well, at the very least, I need therapy to deal with this, because I didn't see this coming. And I was young. I was 34, 33 at the time. And I still had young children. I just totally did not want this for myself. And it made me so angry that trauma from my past that I had worked so hard to get out of was still always going to take my years, like just going to have it, just going to take my vitality. And so I used that anger as fire. I think some parallel spiritual work that was happening at the same time was that not shaming myself for anger, but understanding that that's fuel, and that justifiable anger, and that it can be directed into the right place. So I used it as energy to help me try everything that I needed to try. If there was a new modality on the scene, like EMDR was new, I was like, okay, I will try EMDR. I will try this therapy. I will read that book. I will do whatever I have to do. Because what I wanted was wholeness. And I did not even know if it's possible to be so broken and be whole again. But when I would hear people say, like, I'll never be whole again, I'd be like, I don't want that for myself. I don't accept that. And I can't tell you like why I had the audacity to say that about myself. I had this feeling like, no, wholeness is absolutely possible. And I'm not going to let them have my future.
I can 100% identify with the anger.
Mm-hmm.
So you were born into conservative Christianity and then continued getting more and more conservative, further and further into patriarchy throughout your life. I was born into patriarchy. Yikes. And then left at 2021.
Wow.
But I really, really identify with that anger. I think anger has been a really crucial part of my journey so far. It is because you grieve first. You grieve for what has been lost that can never be replaced.
Right. You'll never have a childhood again. That's little you.
Right. I never get to graduate from high school, and that's okay. And it's okay for me to grieve and cry about it.
Right.
And then it's okay for me to be mad about it.
Yep.
But I don't want to live in the grief or the anger. Both of those are perfectly okay. And for me, they were crucial. I needed to grieve and then be angry. But then, like you, I want to go to that next place after that.
Yeah.
Past the grief and the anger, where those things are fuel, to not missing more things in the future.
Right. And also as a mom. So I want to make that a really practical, like, so let's take it out of the abstract for a second. When I say use it for fuel, I mean courage to change your family line and courage to break cycles has to feed off of something. Like, it's hard to be courageous. So what are you going to build your fire with? You're going to build your fire with, that shouldn't have happened to me, and it's not going to happen to my child. And that will give you energy to educate your child different, protect your child in the ways you should have been protected. When I say keep your courage, that's what I'm meaning. Like, keep your emotion that is going to help drive this change.
Thank you for that. I know a huge percentage of our listeners are parents. So that's a message that I want to have spread loud and clear to them. So I want to talk about the people who helped you during your dramatic escape. I know you went straight to the church and stayed the night at the church with the priest and his wife, right?
His home, yeah, was nearby.
Yeah. And then people from the trapdoor community put you and your children up for months as you were on the road to look at it positively, or on the run to look at it in another way.
Yes.
Let's talk about, I want to talk about those helpers. I want to talk about, I think some people can get very hopeless that there are not helpers like that out there for them.
Right. I think this is a very critical point. Those helpers didn't exist until I was ready to help myself. I had to be willing to say to my priest, and he was there for me immediately. And he also had the prescience to make sure that we had a farewell scene so that I couldn't be accused of kidnapping when I left the state. That was something I'm grateful for still almost every day. Could have changed everything in that case. But from there, I went to my parents. My parents, didn't have any idea what really, like, they saw some red flags and cracks and things, but they really had no idea what we were living through. And I probably would have stayed there longer if things hadn't have gone so south, because the thing that happens when you leave an abuser and narcissistic personality disorder, they get more violent and erratic and unstable. And he definitely did that. He needed resources that he didn't have until that thing went bust. And when it went bust, I had to go into hiding. So what that looked like was a lot of necessary truth telling on my part. I had to square up with my friends and say, this is what is actually happening. And it would have been completely unfair, and I had been doing it for years, is waiting for other people, outsiders, to see my need and presciently come to me and say, I can see you have a need and I'm going to save you. I had to get past that point. That's been like the thing in my spiritual journey, my whole through line through my book, is that I'm waiting on a savior to see me, to help me, to guide me. And it can feel like no one's out there, but really, like, put a mirror on myself. I'm not standing up for myself. I'm not doing what I need to do to save myself. And when I was willing to take that point and show up that way, as in honesty, the helpers came. People said, well, I'll help you with that. I'll buy your groceries. You can come to my house. Here's my car. Like, that kind of stuff did happen. People, like friends of a friends of a friends, I had to be willing to, like, eat some crow and, not care about appearances so much and accept help. I had to reach out to shelters, but those resources are all there all the time.
I mean, one of the things that fundamentalism really does so well is teaches people to be afraid of anyone who's outside of their little bubble, their little circle.
That's right.
That's a thing that can, and we've heard this time and time again from so many people who have decided to leave, that has been a thing that's been a huge obstacle for them getting out, is the fear of what's outside of that environment.
It is terrifying, but not more terrifying than what I had faced in the house. And that was always with me, was realizing no one out here is threatening to bludgeon me. And if they did, I could call the police and say, hey, this stranger is threatening to bludgeon me. That's one of the great ironies. When you're married to them, the police don't do very much. But when it's a stranger, suddenly you can file assault charges. So,
but women are definitely legally people, right?
Right.
One of the things that really just struck me was when your husband got fired from his job for punching his boss.
Yes.
And then decides to move your family to Tennessee, to this reformed
Covenant Reformed Evangelical Church. So it was a church that was from Doug Wilson's denomination.
Doug Wilson is Vision Forum, right?
No, he's Moscow,
Doug
Idaho.
Phillips. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Doug Wilson makes Doug Phillips look like a guy who's just really into cosplay. He's really, really
Facts.
A different guy named Doug. But
I call them the Dougs. Yeah.
You suddenly think like, wow, Vision Forum doesn't sound so bad anymore.
one of the things that struck me was just how in that community, just like how open the husbands were about the Christian domestic discipline that they were handing out, and just how open they were about the abuse that they were doing. And it was just like a joke. It was played for laughs.
Oh, we see this now on the national stage. When the patriarchy gets really confident in their position, they stop trying to screen it and hide it. So J.D. Vance is saying things openly about, how his wife isn't white, but he still thinks she's a great mom.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
That's that's not something that he would have said out loud, if he wasn't really sure that the environment that he was saying it in is fine. But it's been there all along. That's currently, that's always a trait of the patriarchy. The divorce, they're trying to get rid of no-fault divorce, which saved my life, which saves probably millions of women from domestic abuse that can't stand in court and prove fault against an abuser, or they'll die. He knows he can talk about that. Joel Webben is another patriarch who talks about the end of women's suffrage. Like, they're not even quiet about it anymore.
And I really hope that your book permeates far enough for people outside our little world, because we have our little world of ex-fundamentalists and deconstructors, and I love our community so much. This is my first time meeting you virtually.
Yes.
But I feel like I know you because I'm personal friends with Chat and Heather and Lindsay, and
there's so much overlap in deconstruction land. There's a lot.
We're all connected, and it's a beautiful little world. But this is something that really needs to make it outside of our world, especially at this time in American history.
I agree. And that's why I did it the way I did it. Like, I intentionally went after a traditional publishing deal and intentionally wanted a Big Five publisher. And it's getting national press and all of the treatment that a big book gets because that's the path that I put it on. I didn't want to tell this quietly because there's really just not time. It's now or never. November could change our country in forever ways.
I 100% agree. And I thank you and respect you so much for giving what you've given. I think you've consented to share the deep, dark moments that are in this book. And I trust you as a human to have made your own choices. I'm not going to accuse you of exploiting yourself, because I know I make my own choices on what to share and what not to share. I'm not exploiting myself, and I feel good about my own choices. So I certainly trust that you've done the same. But you have given, aside from, I know that you've done it on purpose, and I know that you've done it consensually. You have given so much with this book. You have given the world these pieces of your life. You have given all of us this window, this insight into your incredible life. That is such a massive gift that I almost run out of words.
I know the feeling.
You've given a gift, you've given a sacrifice for all of us and for our future. And I admire and appreciate that so much.
Thank you. The saying, I have nothing to lose isn't true. We have everything to lose. If I couch it and I don't go for broke on this, we could lose freedom. And I already fought with almost lost my life, almost lost my children's lives, waited too long, worried about appearances, wanted to keep things private for too long. So it was really I gotta put it all out there because freedom matters that much. It's that important.
And I respect you so much for it. I feel like I'm going to go on. So now that I've read it through twice now. So I read it, and then my life got a little bit crazy for a while. And then I came back and read it again to prep for this interview. And now I feel like I need to go tell everybody I know.
Thank you
listeners,
so much.
Absolutely. We'll put a little bit more of our book reviews and thoughts on the writing style. They're all incredibly positive. before and after this interview and the episode, but absolutely pre-order it now. And I want to see you on the bestsellers list so bad.
Number
Thank
one.
you. I'm hoping for that as well.
Let's do it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Do you have any final thoughts or anything that you can say about I know we're running short of time here for our interview. Can you talk about healing and wholeness? And I'm not expecting you to say I'm there, I've arrived, but can you give us the happy ending, or where we are on the happy ending of your healing? Where have you gotten to? What's down the path for people who are healing like you're healing?
Well, down the path is probably good news to people who resonate with my story. My second book sold, and it's all on how I healed. It's called The Soul of Healing, and it comes out August of 2025, so a year from now.
Can I order that now?
You almost. Pre-orders will be open very soon.
Or you can come back on when that one comes out.
Please.
Absolutely will. But so I wanted to break down my healing process because I wrote the book I needed to read, and it didn't exist. I really carved my own path, and I fought my own battles on this, and I'm just a survivor. I'm not a doctor or anybody. It's a survivor's guide to how I did it. I would say I'm as close to whole as I've ever felt in my life. I'm always growing. I'm committed, doggedly committed to living an anti-fundamentalist life. So I'm always examining where fundamentalism shows up, even in recovery, because we can get kind of fundy about our healing standards too. So that's what I do on the Anti-Fundamentalist, is break that down and explore that constantly. And I hope I'm always doing that. I hope I'm always staying really curious and grappling with what is. I have a tendency, because I'm an optimist, because I can be a little Pollyanna, Anna Green Gables, I have a tendency to sugarcoat things and see the bright side. And that sometimes keeps me from dealing with the reality of what I'm actually dealing with here. So taking that pragmatist approach and accepting what is helps me find the courage for what I need to change. And it will take courage to change. And that's where the fuel and the fire come in. So that's my wheelhouse. That and emotional regulation, nervous system regulation. I wish I'd learned it as a child. It's really changing my life as an adult, and learning how to be an autonomous creature with agency means I need to regulate my own nervous system, which makes me less dependent on external control, which helps me not fall for those sales pitches again, because fundamentalism really works hard to sell the pretty pitch. And I don't want to fall for it again.
And you've written us the product review for the product that fundamentalism is trying to sell us. Listen, the package was nice, but once I opened it, here's what happened.
Rot.
And I tried turning it on and off and back on again, and I tried unplugging it and plugging it back in again, and I took it to the dealership, and
love that.
And I did all of these things, but this product just does not. It's not reliable. It does not work. It does not deliver what it promises, and what it does deliver you is a steaming pile of crap.
Yes.
So don't do this.
I don't know. I think you were just using it wrong. You didn't honor your husband enough.
Jeez, risky joke much.
I know, and I want to just like I watch my mouth on these interviews, but I am a big
It's okay.
fan
I'll bleep anything out that
no.
Yeah, we bleep.
Yeah, it's a big you, but in the most loving way.
Yeah.
Totally get it.
There's nothing like survivor humor.
Right? I'm so grateful that we get to laugh this out and not just always cry it out. So, it's all somatic, and I'm really grateful for it.
Yeah, there is nothing like the level of dark jokes that survivors can make.
Gallows humor.
I've got Cult Survivor, and I've got Dead Dad.
Oh.
So me and my dead dad friends are just as bad.
Yeah,
it's wonderful. It's the most healing thing.
It is. I agree.
Well, I am just overjoyed to hear that you are putting out another book, because as I was reading the end of A Well-Trained Wife, I came to my mind, there needs to be a second book.
Oh, yes.
On how to heal. I think so many people want healing. Cult survivors and abuse survivors and survivors of narcissistic relationship abuse and all of the people whose stories echo ours or parts of ours want healing and want it badly, but they don't know where to go, where to start looking for healing, what they need to start the actions that they need to start doing to gain healing. And the end of this book was a great start on that. And I am so excited for the next one.
That's good. Yeah, no, I really, the number one piece of advice I always give people is to take the urgency out of it. Quit letting anything else tell you have to go fast. It really is go fast, go slow to go fast. Sit down on the ground and just be and learn to love yourself. Give yourself a big hug for everything that you've been through. It's going to be okay. And there's all the time in the world, which is not something we're used to hearing in fundamentalism.
Yeah. This year is 10 years-ish out of the IFB for me. My leaving process was between 2013 and 2015. So this is right around that 10-year mark. And I think this year has been a new reminder of how much I still have to work on.
Yeah, we do. We all do. I mean, you're taking big, giant steps now, but that's how life is. We heal in our lives.
Yeah. And that commitment to it is something that clearly brings you joy in the way that it brings me joy. That commitment of, oh, you can watch me, I'm going to heal.
That's right, you are. Yeah. And there's more ahead than all that's been. Like, you watch out.
It's those people with that kind of fire that I enjoy being around most. Because it's the kind of thing that motivates me. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
For spending your time with us today. We cannot wait to have you back in the future. And thank you for this book.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me on.
This book was fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Tia for being with us on this interview. Once again, her book, A Well-Trained Wife, is out tomorrow, August 6th, 2024. You can pre-order today online and get lifetime access to her Substack. Please, please, please go buy this book immediately. We would love to see her chart. Really, what is it? It's not charting because we have charts. What do books have? Bestseller list?
Bestseller list, New York Times.
I would love to see her go way, way up on the bestseller list. And I hope that we can be a small part of that. This book is absolutely crucial, in my opinion.
Yes. You can also follow Tia on social media. I believe it's Tia Levings Writes on Instagram and Twitter, and wherever she is, you can follow her there. You can follow this podcast on social media at Leaving Eden Podcast. You can follow me on social media at GAVRIELHACOHEN. Sadie, your socials?
Oh, Tia Levings Writer.
Writer, not
WRITER. Yeah.
Okay.
But we'll have her tagged in absolutely everything that we're putting out around this episode. You can follow me on Instagram at Sadie Carpenter Music and also on Threads. And you can follow me on TikTok at Sadie Carpenter 1.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Go buy Tia's book tomorrow. I'm telling you to do this. If we ever needed a cult to, behavior control people into buying something, we're behavior controlling you into buying Tia Levings' book.
We will take the heat for that. It's worth it.
Yeah, it's definitely worth reading. It's a cool 280 pages, something like that. Definitely worth reading. Go buy it now, tomorrow, whenever you're hearing this. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. You have a great day. Bye-bye.